And don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing's gonna be alright.
In the world that was, they told you it was wrong. Want more? Their time is at an end. Our time has begun.
There's bitter days ahead. Death and terror. The dark man grows stronger every day. And soon he'll destroy all who stand against him. So the world is now a blank page. And it is there. You must make your stand.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Hornaday, movie critic for The Washington Post, and I am delighted to welcome my guest from the new CBS All Access miniseries Stand, actor Jovan Adepo, and showrunner and executive producer Benjamin Cavell. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Having us.
Pleasure.
Ben, the series is based on a book that was written 40 years ago, which is hard to believe that it's been around that long. The plot involves a world being ravaged by a pandemic, which is something that we all know too well in our own reality today. What is it like to be releasing this series in the shadow of a real-life pandemic?
Yeah, well, right. And it's, of course, it's surreal, and it was surreal making it. I mean, being sort of getting toward the end of our Vancouver production and starting to hear these stories coming out of China and then Italy and finally New York. I mean, we didn't wrap our principal photography in Vancouver until our last day just happened to be March 11th or daybreak on March 12th. So yeah, we while we were there, it became clear that this was happening. The funny thing, or I don't know, I don't know if it's funny to anyone but me, but I don't really think of The Stand as a book about a pandemic. I mean, obviously it is. Obviously, it has a pandemic in it, but I mean, King has said before that the book is really his attempt to do Lord of the Rings in America, and Captain Trips, the virus in the book, is kind of a mechanism to clear out the world so that the heroes can walk to Mordor. I mean, for me, it's always been much more about what comes after, and this elemental struggle between the forces arrayed behind Flag and the forces arrayed behind Mother Abigail for the soul of the world that's left, and this question of how you rebuild if you're given the chance to given the chance, if you're in a position where it's necessary to essentially press the reset button on human civilization and figure out how you're going to build it from the ground up. That's the question that our characters are confronted with, and frankly, the reason that we decided on our non-linear narrative structure was that we felt the honest place to start was after the pandemic, and then to flash back, of course, and to see some of the ways that people got where they are and see some of the ways in which they were affected by the collapse, but to really tell the story of this brewing confrontation that we build to.
Jovan, I take that point, Ben, that it's about pushing that reset button, which is also very resonant today. I mean, talk a little bit about, Jovan, how you feel that that aspect of the story will resonate, especially with younger viewers of the series.
Well, I think one of the most interesting pulls on it is that there's so many fantastic characters in this story going through this moment together that I think a lot of audiences will have an opportunity to try to kind of relate to different characters in the story and perhaps have discussions as each episode airs about what they would do in those situations. And if I mean, we all like to think that if something of that magnitude actually happened and we're trying to navigate this post-apocalyptic world, we would all just do things that are absolutely on the straight and narrow and are absolutely just. But when you're kind of thrown in that moment and you have to make a decision, all of these characters are kind of forced to kind of just this fight or flight fight or flight mentality. And I think it'll be fun week in and week out to kind of see people attach themselves to particular characters in our story and try to deliberate with their friends and family about what they would do differently or the same.
Definitely, this is such a panorama of different characters, locations. I mean, you're exactly right about that, that it does give audience members these opportunities to kind of inject themselves into all these different situations and play out those scenarios. It's really fascinating as sort of a thought experiment for everybody watching, a morality thought experiment. So Ben, going back to that March 11th date, you wrapped filming. Does the pandemic, does the real time news impact the editing? I mean, how did it impact the way that you shaped the series going forward after?
It really, I mean, well, how did it shape the editing? I mean, it meant that we had to do all of it remotely, so practically it completely changed. I've never set foot. I mean, I guess I was there when we rented the space, but I've never set foot inside our post-production office because by the time I got back to LA from Vancouver, we weren't we weren't allowed to go in. So yeah, I mean that's just changed the practicalities completely. In terms of the actual show, though, it really hasn't. I mean, there was a suggestion at one point early on about whether we were going to sort of acknowledge COVID in the show, and whether somebody was going to say, "Wow, this is even worse than COVID" or something. And I really resisted that, and I'm very glad I did because I that just would have felt really dishonest. I mean, the conceit of our show is that this is a world that gets hit instead of with COVID, it gets hit with Captain Trips, which no matter how bad the awfulness that we're all living through, it gets hit with something. The world of the show gets hit with something much worse that within the space of a few weeks wipes out 99 in the book it's 99.4. In our story it's more like 99.99% of everyone. By the way, I think it's that in the book too, because we did the math about how many people would be left in Manhattan if 99.4% were wiped out, and it would have still been too full for us to have the beautiful sojourn that Jovan and Heather Graham have in an empty New York. So, but we really didn't. We look. We did a lot of research about how people might respond to a spreading pandemic in 2019, and I'm happy to say, or I don't know, or exhausted to say, or I don't know, horrified to say. I think we got a lot of it right. I mean, there were a couple scenes that we shot late on, like a couple pickups that were in some of the early episodes of sort of some big crowd scenes and people walking around as it was clear that the disease was spreading, but before people realized how serious it was. And I think in some of those scenes we went out of our way to put like a sprinkling of people in masks because we wanted it to be clear that they really in the span of a few weeks this virus runs through everywhere. So we wanted to make it clear that they didn't really have time to adapt and figure out ways to protect themselves, but that people were kind of doing this catch as catch can. Some people wearing masks, some people trying to stay clear of other people, and frankly, that a lot of that felt true to the experience of living through it, where sort of in some fundamental ways everybody was on their own to kind of figure out, well, how are you going to do, how are you going to do this, how are you going to respond, what are the little rituals that you're going to put in place in your day-to-day life to try to protect yourself.
Exactly. And for those listeners, Captain Trips is the name of the mysterious flu that is taking over everybody. So when you filmed those extra pickup scenes, were you doing that under these new protocols? Especially, I would think if they were crowd scenes, that would have been kind of complicated.
So I'm talking about I'm talking about really like February. So no, we were
I
not. I
see.
mean,
Okay.
it was much more that we had seen the stuff in China and Italy and starting to see it in New York. And so yeah, we were really responding to that. No, the only stuff that we had to film under the new protocols was so we wrapped our principal photography in Vancouver when we were supposed to, at daybreak on March 12th. And then the plan had been the next week that we would go and shoot another week in Las Vegas. We had already shot in Las Vegas for 1 week. We were going to go shoot another week, and we didn't get to do that until August. So that we did do in August with all the new protocols, and had just a wonderful Vegas shoot. And Amber was there and was a complete trooper. But yeah, that was the only stuff that we actually had to get in this new environment.
So having gone through that, are you optimistic that, I mean, it seems like it really seems that after the initial shock, Hollywood really kind of adapted. I mean, we're seeing Matrix 4 being shot in Berlin. Obviously, Tom Cruise is in the news today for being stern, understandably so, I think, with his cast and crew about following protocols. But it feels like, how did it feel to be shooting under those conditions? I mean, is it workable?
Oh, I certainly think it's workable. I mean, it was a challenge, but I don't know, a film shoot is kind of a constant series of challenges. I mean, to me, a set is like one big emergency sort of most of the time. And I certainly, the reaction from the crew was like, all right, well, this is one more thing we need to be aware of, and we need to sort of take steps to mitigate. And the fact is, all those departments are doing versions of that for so many things that I don't know, never even occur to anyone because they just take it for granted. So it really felt, at least in our experience, it really felt like it was just integrated into everything else. And of course, it made things slower and sometimes more complicated. But I think if it's approached in the spirit of, well, for one thing, nobody really knows exactly how to do this. Everybody's figuring it out as we go because this is all so new, and people are gonna have to be reminded. And it was kind of like, we were able to say early on, like, let's try to treat each other with some understanding and kindness and goodwill, and acknowledge that we're all in pretty much uncharted territory, and trying to make this work and keep each other safe. So let's give each other a little bit of room for things not to move as quickly or as efficiently as they usually do. And frankly, as we went on and people really started to kind of, I don't know, to get the feel for how to operate with these new protocols in place, it just got easier.
So, Jovan, you play a lead role, and I would say a crucially lead role in this story, in this stand, which boasts, and we say all-star cast, but this really is an all-star cast. In addition to Jovan Adepo, we have Whoopi Goldberg, we have James Marsden, Alexander Skarsgård, Amber Heard that we saw in the trailer. So what attracted you to this particular project, Jovan?
I think it's just that. I think it's getting an opportunity to work with artists that I've always admired and always have wanted to work with, and just being in an environment where the entire cast, the crew, the creative minds, Ben, Taylor, Josh, the writers room, everyone was really, really excited to get to bring this version of or our adaptation to life into the screen for a newer audience, while still trying to entertain the loyal fans of the original series and the book. So just getting a chance to be a part of that, and to really kind of go to set every day and people are totally enthused and excited about doing great work. That's always like the best thing that you can get as an actor, if you're lucky to experience that, because it's not always guaranteed from project to project.
Do you have a favorite scene? You have some really juicy, might not even be the right. There's one scene in particular I want to ask you about in
Okay.
a minute. But is there one that's particularly memorable that you'll associate with this for forever forward?
Without, without spoiling it,
Yeah,
one of my
no spoiler.
favorite to watch would have to be some of the Vegas scenes. I mean, it's really hard to pick like a specific one, because they were all really like just larger than life and amazing. But the collective of Las Vegas scenes that I saw, even when I wasn't working on those days, it was just really cool to see, because there were so many moving parts, and to get to see kind of the characters that are surviving and enjoying their time in Vegas. It's a spectacle. So I was really enjoying watching those sequences play out.
I got to see a few of the early episodes. I didn't get to the Vegas episodes, but the production value on this is just beyond it's
Yeah.
really, really impressive. I'd like to show a quick clip now. This is from the second episode in the series. It features Jovan's character, Larry Underwood. Let's roll it and then we'll talk about it coming back.
I'm not dangerous, I swear.
You don't look dangerous. You don't look sick either. You passed by me earlier.
Well, you're hard to miss.
Sit down. Share my umbrella. I'm Rita Blakemore.
Harry Underwood.
I almost hid when I heard you coming. I thought you were the man that's been carrying on all morning.
Ah. Lost a shot.
It's very apt. This is my husband's. He was terrified of being robbed. Maybe I'll try it. Can you hold this? I think I can hit this birdhouse right there.
I really don't think that's such a good idea.
Bullseye.
So, Jovan, tell us a little bit about your character, Larry Underwood. Who is he and where is he at in this particular moment?
So Larry is that guy that for all for what it's worth, he has all of the tools, I think, to be a truly talented and sincere and kind human being, but he just hasn't quite figured out how to kind of decide when to use those tools in a productive way. I think we meet him and he's a guy that's just been in this pattern of doing what he wants to do, regardless of how it affects others. And he's really enjoying the less favorable, I guess, well, he's a substance abuser is is the easiest way to put it. And he's kind of like just in this pattern where he just wants to find things that benefit him. And yeah, it's just he's kind of a selfish guy, but I think inherently he has a great spirit, and it just takes being in this situation to kind of try to find that out as he goes on through his story.
I found him to be so relatable in that way, in terms of just being in that part of that stage of your life where you're living in the moment, you're living for your pleasures, you're living for your art. He's a musician, I mean, he's self-absorbed, but not coming from an evil or wicked place. But so here's the scene I wanted to ask you about, and again, I don't want to commit any spoilers, but a few minutes after that scene, you
Mhm.
are in a place that's very uncomfortable, with very uncomfortable things happening to you and very uncomfortable creatures um, being present in your life. And I was wondering, are you playing against, I mean, I'm assuming those are special effects at that point. If you know the scene I'm talking about, no, and Ben's shaking his head. Are you
Yeah,
kidding me?
I know what
Okay.
scene you're talking about.
I know what scene you're talking about, and I assure you that I mean there are some special effects in there, but not a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, there were
Okay.
definitely
I
like
will.
moments where it was if the special effects were there, it's because it absolutely, absolutely had to be. But from my memory, I recall those creatures, as you mentioned, being very real
Okay.
and being around all day.
Yeah,
Oh
there
my.
were wranglers and animals and
Man,
ASPCA people, and yes, it
Oh Lord.
was
Oh,
a scene,
just
and it was
you know.
deep in cold water that
yes.
we were all wading in. I mean, we had waders and stuff, except for Jovan, who had to be in costume. But oh well.
I will not be able to unsee that scene, and I'm sure you will not be able to unsee that scene for years to come. It's really
Absolutely.
intense. And so with that lovely tantalizing teaser, everyone's going to have to tune in and see what we're talking
Oh,
about.
good.
So Ben, obviously The Stand has been adapted before. It's long been people have long wanted to adapt it for a feature film, and I don't think it ever was able to come to fruition. But it was a series in '94. You mentioned that one of the I wouldn't say liberties, but one of the creative things you did was sort of play with the time structure on this one a little bit.
Mhm.
Was that in part to kind of distinguish this from past attempts?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it was in part to distinguish it, but it was really mostly, because it felt like that was the story we were telling, that we just didn't want to make people sit through 3 episodes of the world dying before we got to the meat of our story, which is what comes after. And we also, we were very aware. Taylor Elmore, who I brought in to help me shepherd the show through production, he and I are big Steven Soderbergh fans and love Contagion, and we just felt like, well, I don't see how we're going to do the kind of slow roll of a worldwide spread of a pandemic better than Soderbergh did in Contagion. And it just felt like it was sort of beside the point. I mean, not beside the point, obviously, but it just felt like it wasn't. That's really not our narrative. We're really interested in these questions about rebuilding and what comes after in that struggle. So that was a reason we made that timeline decision. And yeah, I mean, as you said, I know there have been a lot of attempts to do the book as a feature. I can't wrap my head around how you would even approach it as a feature. I mean, George Romero tried to do it back in the day, and I know Affleck tried to do it for a while, and obviously Josh Boone tried to do it as a feature. I don't know how you do that. One of the things that I was so excited about was that we have even more time than the original miniseries, and so we were able to restore. I'm so happy you played that scene with Larry meeting Rita, because I love that scene. It's a scene in the show that is almost verbatim, the scene from the book. And one of the things that I was really excited about being able to restore was Rita Blakemore, because she's cut from the original miniseries. Larry escapes New York with Nadine, and I feel like that's a real loss. Like I one of the really memorable parts of the book for me is that sojourn that Rita and Larry have in this kind of empty Manhattan. I always, whenever I read it, I hear the Simon and Garfunkel song, "The Only Living Boy in New York." But I don't know. I love that scene. I love that whole story, and I'm so glad that we were able to do it and get Heather Graham to come do it. Who,
Absolutely.
she just knocks it out of the park, and their chemistry together, as you see in that scene, is undeniable.
You're right. We have neglected to mention this is a 1,000-page book. I mean, it's just
Yes.
almost it's
What
mind blowing. And
if
I
not?
agree with that. That New York storyline is a beautiful, beautiful sequence within this sprawling story. Does the fact that I mean, you obviously have been behind some of the most bingeable series in recent memory with Justified and Homeland. Does um does this new form of watching, when people can just like plow on through or they can decide to do it week to week, does that affect these structural decisions that you're making and creative decisions you're making about how to tell a story?
I mean, it I guess it could, if I were one of the people who really just thinks of these, incredibly high end, this sort of new medium of this incredibly high end limited series. If I just thought of it as a 9-hour feature, then I guess it might affect the storytelling. But I never have. I've always felt what's so exciting, frankly, about these limited series that have feature level casts and feature level budgets and feature level effects is that it is a 9-hour feature, and yet it's not just a 9-hour feature, right? I mean, it also has, each episode just has to be a satisfying chapter with a beginning, middle, and end, and hopefully, some kind of propulsive visceral momentum from one episode to the next. And I think that's true of every show that I've loved and loved working on. I mean, it was certainly something that we talked explicitly about on Justified, on Homeland, on Sneaky Pete. On every show I've ever done, we would always hold ourselves to the standard of, no, you can't just make a 10-hour feature. That's not what this is. We have a responsibility to tell a story every week that drives people into the next story, and that's just good storytelling, I think. So I see the question and I appreciate it, and I do think that sometimes it is a bit of a challenge, certainly for people who have only worked in a feature medium, to come to this this enormous sprawling limited series and think, oh no, wait, I can't just have the first 3 hours be all kind of act one type exposition the way you would in the first third of a feature. It's no, I need to break this up into satisfying chapters and have them stand alone, and also have it all form into ultimately a satisfying feature at the end of the 9 hours. And that's, I suppose, the trick.
This is actually for both of you, and I will admit I'm the film critic at the Post, so I'm biased. This is obviously a year where people went to streaming, they went to binging. People are worried about feature films and the future of theatrical films. Do you see an ecosystem where theatrical is still with us? I mean, I know that you're in the series world, but I guess I would love to get your perspective as storytellers, coming from that vantage point, about the difference between features and streaming, and whether or not theatrical features are still relevant moving forward.
Do you have a thought on that, Jovan?
You can start. So
Well,
I'm like just trying to
I
gather.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I certainly hope that there's still, I don't know, there's still features in the world. I mean, I love seeing things on a big movie screen. I also think that home theaters and that kind of technology is getting so good that it's the rare feature that you really feel is necessary to see in a bigger environment than your home can provide. Um, but no, I think there's still a place for that. I mean, it's really about being able to tell different kinds of stories. I mean, as I said, this kind of hybrid TV feature medium that we're working in. I mean, I know a lot of people date the beginning of that from the first season of True Detective, where you were getting these movie stars to be in TV shows. These people who would never sign on for an ongoing series, but who were willing to do one season of a thing with that kind of feature level care paid to every element, and those budgets, and those just and that kind of preparation time, and yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like that's the only way to make the stand. But there are other stories that, no, I mean, if you tried to stretch them out over a 9 hour limited series, would just feel lame, and like there's just not enough there, So I really think it's story specific, and I think it's frankly really exciting to have all these different ways to tell stories. I mean, I love small shows, and I even loved, I know it didn't end up working, but I loved the notion of telling these little bite-sized Quibi stories. I thought that was really cool to be thinking about, why do we just take it as I don't know, as fact that, well, obviously dramas need to be an hour long and comedies need to be a half hour, and that's just, that was handed down to Moses on top of Mount Sinai or something. But there's no actual reason for that, right? And so I think it's really exciting to be playing with all this stuff, and just to have more freedom as storytellers. I think that's all to the good, and I hope movies come back. I'm with you.
I definitely have to agree with everything Ben said. I think with all of the different avenues of telling these stories, it also brings about a lot of opportunities for actors and for writers and directors to have more, more moments to get to create. So that's definitely a great thing. But I like to think of it as an audience member as well, and as a longtime lover of movies. Getting that love from my father, who's an absolute cinephile. Is that what I miss the most about the theatrical experience that you can get in a home theater, but is a bit lacking, is that sense of community and being able to experience a story with a group of people. You know what I mean? I think that also plays into a lot of how we receive the stories that are being told on these screens, is because we're sharing it and we're experiencing it with a group. and it's kind of like for that hour, that 2 hours or whatever, it's just like a giant family. And it doesn't really matter what genre it is, if it's drama, if it's comedy, horror, whatever. You're all experiencing these moments, moment to moment together, and that is something that I think is really hard to recreate outside of the movie theater, and something that I definitely miss. So I hope, yes, that that the feature realm, and as it plays on in theaters around the world, does find a way back into our reality for sure.
Great. Your mouth to the movie god's ears. I have time for one last question. Unfortunately, we have to keep the answers brief, but we do know that Stephen King did change the ending to The Stand for this miniseries. No spoilers, but can you give us a little insight, little tantalizing visibility into what that entails?
I'm happy to. No spoilers. Yeah, he'd been wanting to write this coda for 30 years, and he sort of mentioned it, and we weren't sure he was going to be willing to do it. And then when he saw the first couple drafts of what we were doing, and felt like he was really into it and really could support it and really believed in our vision, he trusted us to tell that story. And it's just, it's so exciting. I without spoiling anything, I will say that the reason for it, the genesis of it, in his mind, was that it always bothered him that Franny, even though she is obviously one of the main heroes of the book, doesn't get to go on the stand. In the book, she's 7 months, 8 months pregnant when they leave, and she's not therefore in any kind of position to walk across the Rocky Mountains to Vegas with them. But it always aided King that Franny was in some ways the protagonist of the book. I mean, she's such a big part of it, and then she gets sort of left out of the climactic confrontation. So the genesis of it from King's point of view was, this is him giving Franny her stand.
Mm.
That's incredibly promising. I'm so sorry we have to leave it there, but I want to thank Jovan Adepo, Benjamin Cavell. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you again for having
Terrific to be here.
If you would like to watch highlights from today's program, head over to WashingtonPostLive.com. The Stand premieres on CBS All Access tomorrow, with new episodes airing weekly on Thursdays. And be sure to join Washington Post Live back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. My colleague Jonathan Capehart will moderate a reporter panel and talk to some Washington Post columnists about the biggest news stories of the day. You won't want to miss that. I'm Ann Hornaday. Thanks again for watching.